Hi crafty peeps, it's Kat. Today's video is a continuation of our last adventure where we made our own stencils. If custom stencils is something you're interested in, I'll leave that video in the description box for you. I've made a bunch of backgrounds using those custom stencils, and today I'm turning those panels into cards. I got 6 backgrounds and 8 cards for y'all. Most of them are surprisingly quick and easy. Okay, let's get to it. Let's take a look-see at what we're working with today. You'll notice that there's a handful of snowflakes in there, so we're gonna get a jump start on our Christmas cards today. Honestly, I'm of the opinion that it's never too early to start on Christmas cards. For my very first card though, I picked out the butterfly panel because it's simply my favorite out of the bunch. I cropped my panel using my nested rectangle dies, and I also cut a slightly larger mat to go with it. I used the 4th die from the outside of the panel and the 3rd die for the mat. Next, I'm gonna add some splatter. Evidently, I was channeling my inner Kathy Zelski that day because that's not the only card that ended up with splatter. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Splatter Medium in black, and I have to say it's quickly become my favorite. All I need to do is shake it really well before use, and it's super opaque and it's just the right consistency. So I loaded my brush, tapped off some excess to the side, and went kind of on a diagonal here to mirror the path of the butterflies. I don't usually use splatter very often, but I'm going for mostly clean and simple designs today, so I feel like creating some additional movement on a panel is kind of warranted. I set my panel aside to dry, and while that's happening, I will stamp out my sentiments. It's never a bad idea to stamp a bunch at a time because whatever you don't use today will come in handy the next time you make a card. The ones I have here are very pretty, very delicate, scripty birthday sentiments from Honeybee, and I'm using black pigment ink to get a nice saturated and crisp image. Because the lines on the stems are so delicate, I'm barely applying any pressure when I close the MISTI door because I don't want to squish the letters and have the ink splurge out. It's better to stamp it several times with light pressure instead, which is what I'm doing here. Again, I'm barely pressing on the door here. I will then line up and tape down my dies and cut all of the sentiments. The coordinating dies here cut out really close to the letters, so I don't want anything shifting here and messing up my pretty stamping. So I'm gonna tape it down like my card's life depends on it. And once they're cut, look at these beauties. I love that scripty font so much. It's so delicate and dainty. My panel wasn't fully dry yet, so I decided to spend that waiting time stacking my sentiments. I cut 2 blanks for each of the sentiments just from plain white cardstock. And I want to show you a super quick way to stack multiple die cuts. It's really easy to do. You just apply glue to all of your layers at once, except for the very top one. Then you take the top layer and kind of press it down to your 2nd layer and then to the 3rd layer. And then you line up all of those die cuts all at once by gently pushing them into place. It's much faster than doing it one by one. Here I was just playing with the placement of my sentiments, and I kind of had a bit of a hard time deciding. What does your creative process usually look like? Do you build your card around the sentiment, or is it more of a, I don't want to say afterthought, but like the last thing that you think of? Can you let me know in the comments? So in the end here, I settled on I hope all your birthday wishes come true. The assembly here is pretty straightforward. Glue your panel to the mat and glue the mat to the card base. I really like using black for my mats, especially if I have bright colors on my panel, because black just makes those colors pop. And that's kind of why I went with the black splatter as opposed to gold or some other color. Though if you wanted to do gold splatter and gold mat, I think that would be very pretty too. I used some 2mm black foam tape to pop up my matted piece just for a bit of extra dimension. I'm using black foam tape here because of the black mat. It just makes things look more seamless. And I applied some liquid glue to the back of the foam first to give me that extra wiggle room. I then attached my sentiment off camera and voila! Our first card is ready. Clean and simple is usually not my forte since I tend to complicate things 9 times out of 10, but I think this one came out really nice. For my second card, I'm going back in with the stencil I created, and I'm going to ink over one of the pale snowflakes with the darker ink to create more contrast. So I just lined up my stencil, masked everything off, and by the way, I'm using my own corner guide here to do the masking of the cardstock. It was super easy to create. Seriously, just go watch that stencil video after you're done with this one. Here I'm just going over that pale snowflake with the same dark blue ink that I used on that other snowflake. That upper left corner felt a little too empty for my liking, so I decided to stencil a portion of another snowflake there. When you let things bleed off the edge like that, it creates more visual tension and interest. So first I'm going in with a lighter ink. This is Pink Fresh Summer Shower, and the darker blue ink is Seaside, by the way. Then I shifted my stencil so the quote-unquote rays of the snowflake filled the empty spots between the first rays that I inked, and then I blended the darker Seaside color over the opening. If you haven't tried shifting your stencils like that, you totally should give it a go. And here's the finished panel for you. Apparently 3 giant snowflakes weren't enough for me, so I decided to bust out an embossing folder for some extra texture. There's only one tiny problem here. I meant to use the one with just some small snowflakes for a tiny bit of texture, but I was distracted and grabbed the wrong one. And when I took the embossed panel out, a low-grade panic set in because now it has too much texture for my liking. So I stared at this panel in disbelief and disappointment for a bit, but what I ended up doing is running it through the die cutting machine just between the plates with nothing else to help flatten some of that texture out. And it helped a little bit. And to combat any kind of warping from the embossing, I glued a blank panel in the back to help straighten things out. And I set my acrylic block and my wax seal case to make sure that the textured panel made contact and adhered properly. And while that was drying, I stacked my sentiment 3-layer stick. This is actually leftovers from last year. I foiled a ton of sentiments back then, and I ended up using probably only about half of them. So now I don't have to worry about Christmas sentiments for probably all of 2026. I trimmed my snowflake panel to 3 3/4 by 5, and I also trimmed a mat that's about 1/8 of an inch larger than my panel. I didn't have any cardstock that would match my dark blue ink exactly, so I ended up just blending the edges of the mat with the same Seaside ink. That way I had a perfect match. Honestly, you can skip the ink blending here and just go direct to paper with your ink pad to save time. That's kind of what I ended up doing for one of the later cards you'll see. I then glued the snowflake piece to that inky blue mat and then glued the whole thing straight to my card base without popping anything up. Because there's already that extra white panel behind the snowflakes, it has that tiny bit of extra definition. For once, I decided not to overcomplicate things here. And the last thing to do was to put on the sentiment, which again, I glued straight to the card front. It's stacked 3 layers thick, so it has enough definition as is. And here's our second card ready. It was supposed to be simple, but yeah, that didn't end up being the case. But I still like it. I skipped any type of additional embellishments here because I think it has enough going on already. For my third card, I'm trying a technique I haven't done before, and y'all, let me tell you, I ended up absolutely loving it. I've already trimmed down my panel and added some black splatter, and I took a leafy die and cut out the shape right out of the center of that colorful piece. The technique is called Eclipse, I believe, and the idea is pretty simple. You cut out your shape, then stack a bunch of blank die cuts behind it. Here I have 6 plain white ones glued together. So you stack those die cuts to create a lot of lift and dimension. Then you pop that thick piece back into your panel. So here I'm gluing my colorful piece on top of the thick stacked branch, so my colorful layer is layer number 7. You can go as high or as low as you want here in terms of layers. I think it's all a matter of personal preference. You want more lift, you use more layers. You want less lift, use less layers. I kept the rest of my card very flat intentionally because I wanted just that stacked branch to stand out. So I glued the inked panel straight to the card base. I pressed it all down really well. You don't want any of the die cut edges lifting up on you. Then I added the glue right into that white opening and popped in my piece. It kind of slides right in. Word of advice, keep all of your inner pieces for this because as you'll notice, I kind of have a white hole near the top of the blend. I tossed that little piece and in the end, that white space bugged me so much that I inked a scrap of paper with the same green ink and cut out just that tiny little piece from it and popped that into that empty space after I was done filming. For my sentiment, I used another one from my stash. It's been foiled with green foil, and it was originally a banner, but I just snapped off the ends to make it a plain strip. And here's the third card done. Like I said, I fixed that white hole at the top later on. My next panel I split into 3 equal parts and I'm gonna get 3 cards out of it. The idea is pretty simple. I will glue the snowflake piece to another panel, slap on a sentiment, and ta-da, I have myself a bunch of cards. But first I'm gonna create some visual texture on my background piece to which I'm gonna glue things. So first I placed a corner guide in my MISTI. It's that milky looking piece of plastic on the left. This will help me stamp multiple panels all in the same place so I don't have to line up my stamp each time. I'll just remove the panel and put in the new one in that corner and it will all line up just right. I'm using a Christmas-themed background stamp here. It's just the lyrics from a bunch of popular Christmas songs. It's pretty small text, so it's more to create some texture rather than to make the text a focal point. Okay, you see how I'm placing my second panel into that corner, but my actual stamp stays put? This is a pretty big time saver when you're stamping multiples. Oh, and by the way, I'm using the same inks that I used to create my snowflake panel so that it's all nice and cohesive. You can use any background stamp you want here. I think some Christmas greenery would be nice. Or if you don't have a stamp, you can do an embossing folder. The assembly part is pretty simple and pretty much the same for all 3 cards. The only thing that I'm changing up is the placement of the snowflake piece. On this first card, I'm placing it at the very bottom. For the other 2 cards, I put it in the middle and on the left. You will see those other 2 at the very end. I just don't want to show you a bunch of repetitive stuff and bore you to death. Okay, I'm putting a thin strip of glitter cardstock at the border of my snowflake panel. This just gives it a more finished look. Plus, I just like my shiny stuff. You can use metallic cardstock, holographic, the world is your oyster here. I'll snap off any excess and the card front is pretty much ready. You can leave it to be a full panel, but I decided to crop it a little bit so that I have a bit of a frame all around when I glue it to the card base. I will use some thin foam tape to pop up that panel. Usually if my cards are simple, I like to create at least a little bit of dimension by giving my panels some lift. I think it does actually make a noticeable difference in the end. I again use some liquid glue on the back of the foam for the extra wiggle room and stuck it down to the card base. My sentiments here are, again, leftovers from last year. I'm telling you guys, it's a time saver when you do a giant batch all at once. These are foiled, and I actually foiled both the positive and the negative from the foil plate. The positive are just the letters, so the purple on white, and the negative is the reverse image, so white letters on purple. The only problem here is that the negatives don't always foil perfectly, so I use those bad pieces for stacking. No one is gonna know they're there. So sentiment is the only thing left here, and I popped it up too with some thick foam squares. And our card is done. Very simple, but very cute. I'll show you the other two at the end. For card number 7, I'm using that blue and purple hearts panel. And really the only thing I'm gonna do here is add a matte and an ink blended sentiment. I'm using the same colors of ink that I used for the hearts, and I'm going for the ombre look from blue to purple. I blended my blue halfway in, and I'm now coming in with purple. I'm not sure what happened, but the letter G on my sentiment had a couple of spots that just refused to take the ink. And the same thing happened to the backing when I tried to ink that instead. So I actually ended up going direct to paper with my ink pad on that area, and that kind of solved the problem. Here's the blended sentiment up close. I added one blank die cut behind my colorful piece and I'm gluing it to the vellum shadow. Then I will come in from the back and will glue another piece that's also 2 layers thick on the back of the vellum. So I'm essentially sandwiching it between my die cuts. So there are 2 layers on top, then vellum, then 2 layers on the bottom. This is to create an additional lift from the background and to create more separation. This time I didn't bother inking my mat with a brush, I just went direct to paper with my ink pad, and it really doesn't matter what the middle looks like since we will be putting stuff over it. Then I'll attach my hearts panel to the mat. Then I'll glue the whole thing to a white card base and put on my sentiments. I could have popped this panel up, but I'll be honest, I was feeling a little bit lazy by that point, plus I think it looks super cute as it is. And that's it. I think it came out super adorable. For my last card, I wanted something different, so I went with the arch instead of the rectangle. This one is from Spellbinders, and it adds a nice little stitch detail on the border. The camera is not really picking up how loud this panel is in real life, but trust me, it's pretty bright and punchy, so I wanted to tone it down just a little bit. So first I cut it down to smaller size, and then I brought in some butterflies cut from vellum. You could use plain white cardstock, but I didn't want to cover up too much of the pattern. I just wanted to tone it down a bit, and vellum is kind of perfect for that. This is Shimmer Vellum, by the way. It's really pretty, and honestly, it's a bit of a shame the camera doesn't really pick that up. So I kind of played around with the placement here a bit until I had a solid idea of what would go where. The butterflies are pretty delicate to begin with, and they're even more delicate if you cut them from vellum. So it was honestly a bit of a pain to put them together, but I think it was worth it. I cut some plain white bodies and then also cut the bodies from white glitter cardstock. First, I put some glue on the plain white body and then stuck the wings on top and kind of wiggled it into place where I wanted them. Once I was happy, I took my glitter body and glued it on top of the white, so I'm again sandwiching the vellum in between my die cuts here. Then I kind of gently nudged it into place so that my butterfly bodies line up nicely. Here's a close-up. The glitter is subtle, but it catches the light so beautifully in real life, and these look just gorgeous. I did pop this panel up using 2mm thick tape, but you can skip that if you wanted. I will then glue on my sentiment, which I stack 2 layers thick. I always stack all of my sentiments at least twice. And I use my T-square ruler here to help me get it straight. Just push that up right against the edge. My butterflies I attached only at the bodies. This is for 2 reasons. To hide the adhesive, because vellum just shows everything, and to create extra dimension, because I will zhuzh those wings and kind of bend them up when everything dries. And you know, since we're subtly going all out on this last card, I also added some shinies. They are on the subtle end of the spectrum as far as the shinies go, but they will catch light and kind of help guide your eye through the card. And here's our gorgeous creation. This one and the other one with the butterflies are my favorites. The sentiment on this one is foiled using iridescent blue foil, and all these little details just reflect light so beautifully, but I also feel like they're not too overpowering. And let's look at all the cards together. For the hearts one, I ended up going over the sentiment with the shimmer pen off camera since this card is otherwise very simple. Here's that first pink and purple snowflakes card. I just added some shinies off camera here. And as promised, here are the other two cards made from the same panel. On this one, I glued the snowflakes on the left, added the glitter strip, and added some embellishments around the sentiment for some visual interest. Same idea as the first card, just different placement of the snowflakes. For the third one, I placed the snowflakes in the middle this time and put the glitter strips on either end. And I glued my sentiment right smack in the middle. And again, added the shinies because I'm low-key a magpie. This is the eclipse technique I tried for the first time. I'm a big fan of all that dimension, not gonna lie. This is our blue snowflake card that was almost a disaster, but I think it worked out fine in the end. It's still pretty. This is my second favorite with the butterflies and some splatter. I kinda dig that clean and simple look, not gonna lie. Please remember to subscribe and follow me on Instagram. I'm gonna leave a link in the description box. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video.